Why was a nurse lying in the dirt on a mountain she had never seen, directing a sniper shot while holding a dying man together with one hand? The wind on the eastern slope carried dust and the thin smell of cordite. Sloane Mercer lay flat on her back in the dirt, one hand locked tight around a tourniquet on Harlow's thigh. The other hand pointed toward a rock face nearly 700 meters away. Not waving, not guessing, pointing with the calm precision of someone who had already solved the math. "Eastern wall," she said quietly. 15 meters away, Briggs lay behind a fallen tree, his eye pressed against the scope of the Barrett rifle resting on its bipod. Gravel shifted as he adjusted his position. "I don't have the angle," he muttered. "Come up 6 inches. Use the gap in the rock." Beside her, Harlow's fingers tightened weakly around her forearm. Blood pulsed against the tourniquet. Too much blood, too fast. She didn't look down. "Not yet." "Count of 3, she said. The world narrowed to the ridgeline. 1. The rifle cracked. The eastern wall went silent. Sloane exhaled slowly. Only then did she look down at Harlow. His skin had gone pale in the way arterial wounds make people pale, but the bleeding had stopped. "Nobody dies today," she said. He stared at her, trying to believe it. 72 hours earlier, she had been a nurse in Virginia. And she had just been fired. Why had the quiet ICU monitor changed pitch that night? Most people never would have noticed it. The ICU at Naval Medical Center, Portsmouth, held a particular kind of silence at 4 in the morning. Machines breathing for people. Lights dimmed low. Nurses moving softly like ghosts between rooms. Sloane Mercer had worked there 2 years, long enough to hear the difference between normal silence and the silence before something breaks. The monitor in room 7 shifted. Not an alarm. A rhythm change. Subtle, but wrong. She was already moving before the thought finished forming. The patient was a 61-year-old recovering from cardiac surgery, supposed to be stable, supposed to be routine. But his chest wasn't rising properly. Sloane checked the monitor, then the man's breathing. 4 seconds. That was how long it took her to know what was happening. Tension pneumothorax. Air trapped inside the chest cavity, pressure building, crushing the heart and lung from the inside. Without intervention, the man would suffocate in minutes. She pulled the supply cart forward. No physician yet. No time to wait. Second intercostal space, midclavicular line. The needle slid in. Air hissed out. The patient inhaled sharply. By the time Dr. Calloway walked into the room, pulling his white coat over his shoulders, the crisis was already over. The monitors had stabilized. The man was breathing. Calloway glanced at the chart, then at Sloane. "Good work," he said simply, and walked away. No applause. No conversation. Just another night in a quiet hospital. But that wasn't why she got fired. Why did one small number on a chart refuse to leave her mind? 3 weeks earlier, a patient named Leonard Doyle had died in room 4. 53 years old. School teacher. Married. His wife brought him a magazine every afternoon between 2 and 4. He never read it. But she brought it anyway. Because bringing something meant hope. The morning Sloane came in after his death, the room was already stripped, sheets gone, machines cleaned. But something in the air felt wrong. During lunch, she pulled his chart. She read every line. Every medication. Every timestamp. And there it was. A morphine dosage. At first glance it looked harmless. But Sloane had spent 4 years as a Navy corpsman before becoming a civilian nurse. She knew that in medicine, just like in combat, the small things kill people. The dosage wasn't slightly wrong. It was dangerously wrong. For a man with Doyle's heart condition, that amount of morphine suppressed respiration. His heart simply couldn't compensate. He had suffocated quietly in his hospital bed. Sloane sat in the break room staring at the chart. She thought about Patricia Doyle walking in the next day with a magazine. She thought about her father's words when she was 12. The hardest thing isn't doing the right thing. The hardest thing is doing it when it costs you. The next morning, she filed the incident report. She named the medication. She named the dosage. She named the physician responsible. Dr. Calloway. The meeting with the hospital administrator lasted 7 minutes. His name was Hartfield. He used phrases like staffing optimization and department restructuring. When it ended, he slid an envelope across the desk. "Your clinical skills are excellent," he said, "but your position is being eliminated." She walked to the locker room without arguing. Inside her locker hung a photograph. Her father. Desert camouflage, Afghanistan sunlight in his eyes. Grinning at the camera. Cole Mercer. Killed in Helmand Province. She took the photo down, put it in her bag, and left the hospital for the last time. Why did a military helicopter land in her apartment parking lot the next morning? The rotor sound started low. At first she thought it was a news chopper. But the sound deepened. Slower. Heavier. The Black Hawk descended directly into the parking lot of her building. Sloane stood at the window for 3 seconds. Then she grabbed her jacket and went outside. 4 men stepped around the aircraft. Their movement looked casual. But it was. Years of training had erased the difference between discipline and instinct. The oldest man stepped forward. Silver hair at the temples. Eyes that had spent decades reading Dangerous Places. "Sloane Mercer?" he asked. "Yes." "Master Chief Garrett Drummond." He paused. "I served with your father." The words settled between them. "Our team medic lost 2 fingers this morning," he continued. "Accident, he's out for 3 months." Sloane crossed her arms. "I'm a nurse." "I know." "We deploy in 94 hours, Drummond said calmly. "We need a medic." Behind him, one of the younger operators shifted uncomfortably. "She's never been in combat," the man muttered. Drummond didn't look at him. Instead, he handed Sloane a sealed envelope. Her name was written on the front. In handwriting she knew instantly. Her father's. "He gave it to me before his last deployment," Drummond said. "He told me to deliver it when the moment was right." Sloane stared at the envelope. The postmark was 12 years old. She opened it. The letter inside was written front and back. She read it silently. The men waited. When she folded it again, something in her expression had changed. Not harder. Clearer. "I have conditions," she said. Drummond nodded. "I configure my own medical kit." "Done." "I have full medical authority over casualties." "Agreed." She paused. "And no one overrides my triage decisions." Drummond thought for 2 seconds. "Accepted." The younger operator exhaled loudly. Drummond ignored him. "Can you deploy in 94 hours?" he asked. Sloane looked down at the letter in her hand. Her father's handwriting. A man who had spent his life preparing her for things she didn't yet understand. "Yes," she said. And just like that, her life changed direction. Why did Briggs refuse to trust her during the first 2 days? The forward base sat deep in Honduran foothills. Humidity thick. Air heavy. Drummond's team moved through preparation with quiet efficiency. Weston steady, patient. Harlow strong but hiding a minor ankle injury. Briggs sharp skeptical. He asked Sloane technical questions about medical procedures. But the tone said something else. You don't belong here. She didn't argue. Trust in teams like this wasn't demanded. It was earned. One decision at a time. The first moment came during a training run. Harlow finished last. Not unusual. But Sloane noticed something else. His stride was wrong. Weight shifting off a twisted ankle and loading stress onto the knee. If they deployed like that, he'd lose mobility halfway up the mountain. She stopped him quietly. Sit down. He frowned. My ankle's fine. It's fine now, she said. Tomorrow it won't be. She wrapped the ankle in a precise figure-8 compression technique. Redistributing the load. Correcting the mechanics. Harlow walked 20 meters. Stopped. Looked back. That's better. Stay centered on the foot when climbing, she said. He nodded slowly. Thanks, Doc. Weston had watched the whole thing. Later he passed her in the warehouse. Good call on Harlow, he said quietly. 2 words. But from Weston it meant something. Briggs wasn't convinced yet. But the wall had started to crack. Why did the sniper appear just when the mission seemed finished? The raid on the communications relay station went perfectly for 6 minutes. Drummond's team breached the building. 3 civilian hostages secured. 2 guards neutralized. Everything clean. Then the first shot cracked across the mountain. The round slammed into the wall beside Drummond. Sniper, Weston said over comms. Northwest Ridge. Harlow's voice came next. I'm hit, shoulder graze still moving. Sloane sprinted across the clearing. The Barrett rifle rested behind a rock formation. 30 pounds of long-range steel. Briggs' voice came through the radio. Doc, do not touch that rifle. Drummond interrupted. Briggs, hold position. Silence. Sloane lowered herself behind the weapon. The ridge sat 800 meters away. She searched the rock line. Her father's voice echoed somewhere deep in memory. Don't look for the man, look for the disturbance. There. A thermal shimmer of metal against stone. She steadied her breathing. Squeezed the trigger. The round cracked across the valley. Miss. 8 inches high. She knew it instantly. Cold muscles, high altitude, wind shift. She adjusted. 2 seconds later, the sniper shifted position. She was already there. The second shot fired. The ridge went quiet. The radio filled with stunned silence. Then Briggs' voice. Who made that shot? Drummond stepped out of the building with the hostages. He looked at Sloane. At the rifle. Then back at the ridge. He nodded once. Move. Why did the final shot matter more than any other? The extraction was nearly complete. Vehicles waited in a ravine below. 20 meters of exposed ground. Then safety. Harlow stepped into the open. The shot came from the eastern cliff. Harlow collapsed instantly. Sloane reached him in 6 strides. Blood poured from his upper thigh. Femoral artery. 3 minutes to death. The same wound that had killed her father. She didn't hesitate. Tourniquet around the leg. Windlass twisted tight. Harlow grabbed her arm. Don't let me die. She tightened it another turn. Nobody dies today. Then she looked up. The shooter was repositioning along the cliff. Briggs had the rifle. But no angle. Sloane pointed. Eastern wall, she said calmly. 680 meters, gap in the rock, he'll settle in 4 seconds. Briggs shifted position. I see the gap. Count of 3, she said. Harlow squeezed her arm. One. The Barrett roared. The cliff went silent. And this time, the shot wasn't hers. Why did everything feel different when the mission ended? Back at the base, Sloane spent 2 hours stabilizing Harlow. Tourniquet removed. Wound packed. IV fluid started. When she finished, Ashford stood in the doorway. The same man who had signed her termination letter. "I want to explain," he said quietly. "You don't have to. The report you filed was correct," he said. "But exposing it would have damaged the institution." Sloane looked up slowly. "A dosage error killed Leonard Doyle," she said. "Yes. A review process won't give his wife her husband back." "No," he admitted. "But the record will." Weeks later, a letter arrived. Her termination had been revoked. The doctor responsible placed on leave. The truth officially recorded. Not dramatic justice, but the kind that quietly prevents the next tragedy. 6 months later, Sloane stood in a classroom at Bethesda. 18 Navy corpsmen sat before her. On the board she had written 3 words. Integrate. Adapt. Bring them home. Harlow sat in the back row, walking again. Briggs visited sometimes, still buying coffee he technically owed her. And her father's old force recon patch rested in her pocket. A reminder that the best legacy someone can leave behind isn't protection. It's preparation. Because sometimes the person who saves the most lives is the one who knows how to hold a tourniquet in one hand while guiding a sniper shot with the other. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did that old letter from her father feel heavier than any medical textbook she had ever carried? Sloane sat on the edge of her narrow apartment bed, the envelope still open in her hands. Outside, the helicopter blades had gone quiet. The parking lot was empty again, as if nothing unusual had happened. But the air inside the room felt different now, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Her father's handwriting stared back at her. Not neat, not perfect, but steady. If you're reading this, it means Garrett finally came looking for you. She read the first line again. Her throat tightened slightly. She hadn't heard her father's voice in 12 years, but suddenly it felt close, almost sitting beside her. You'll probably think I shouldn't be asking this of you. And maybe you're right. But if there's one thing you inherited from me, it's the refusal to walk away when someone needs you. Sloane leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. Outside, a car passed slowly on the street below. Normal life continued. Inside the letter, her father's world opened again. War isn't about glory, it's about responsibility. You carry people through their worst moments. Sometimes you save them, sometimes you don't. But the only real failure is not trying. Her fingers tightened around the paper. She remembered the last time she had seen him. She was 16. He had stood in the kitchen wearing desert camouflage, drinking black coffee that had already gone cold. "You'll take care of people someday," he had told her. "How do you know?" she asked. He smiled a little. "Because you already do." At the time, she thought it was just something fathers say. Now the letter sat in her hands like a quiet instruction, waiting 12 years to be opened. At the bottom of the page, a final line. Trust Garrett. She folded the paper slowly, then stood up. Outside, the helicopter crew was waiting again. And this time she walked toward them. Why did the base feel like stepping into someone else's life? The aircraft touched down just before sunset at a forward operations facility carved into thick jungle hills. Humidity wrapped around Sloane the moment she stepped off the ramp. Everything smelled different. Metal, fuel, Wet earth. Men moved through the compound with calm purpose. No shouting, no unnecessary motion, just quiet efficiency. Drummond walked beside her. "You've been around military environments before," he asked. "Not like this," she said. "You were a Navy corpsman." "For years," she nodded, "but mostly ship rotations." Drummond grunted. "This will be different." They stepped into a long equipment building where 4 men were already waiting. The team. Weston leaned against a workbench, arms folded. His expression looked calm, almost patient. Harlow sat on a crate, tying his boots. Briggs stood near the far wall, cleaning a rifle, with the kind of care that bordered on obsession. The 4th man, Torres, looked younger but carried himself with quiet confidence. Drummond didn't waste time. "Listen up," he said. The room shifted instantly, attention focused. "This is Sloane Mercer. She's our medic now." Silence. Briggs was the first to speak. "She's a nurse." Sloane didn't respond. Drummond did. "She's the medic." Briggs wiped the rifle barrel slowly. "She's never been in a combat zone." Torres shifted slightly but said nothing. Weston studied Sloane for a moment. Not judging. Observing. Sloane stepped forward calmly. "I don't expect trust," she said. The room stayed quiet. "But if one of you gets hurt, you'll want the best hands possible." She set her medical bag on the table. "I'm those hands." Harlow chuckled softly. Briggs didn't smile. But something in the tension eased just a little. Drummond clapped his hands once. "Gear up, we brief in 20. Why did the mission feel wrong before it even started? The briefing room was dim, lit mostly by the glow of a digital map projected on the wall. Drummond stood beside it. "Target location," he said. A blinking point appeared deep in mountainous jungle terrain. "Signal relay station, used by a private militia group." Torres leaned forward. "Cartel?" "Not exactly," Drummond said. "Former military contractors." The room grew quieter. "Those were dangerous men." "Professionals." "They're holding 3 civilian engineers hostage," Drummond continued. "Extraction window is narrow." Sloane studied the terrain on the screen. Steep ridges, dense forest, limited access routes. She had spent enough time around military planning to understand one thing. Nothing about this would be simple. Weston pointed at a narrow valley. "Only viable approach." "Correct," Drummond said. Briggs frowned. "Which means they know it too." Drummond nodded slightly. "Exactly." Sloane felt a small tension settle in her chest. That quiet instinct again. The same one that noticed the ICU monitor chain. Something about the plan felt too clean. But she stayed silent. For now. Drummond finished the briefing. Deployment at 400. The men began gathering equipment. Briggs slung his rifle over his shoulder and passed Sloane without looking at her. Weston paused beside her. "First mission nerves?" he asked quietly. "Not nerves," she said. "Something else." He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Good," and walked away. Why did the training run change the way they saw her? Morning came early. The jungle air was thick and warm even before sunrise. Drummond believed in simple tests. 5-mile climb, he said. Full gear. The team started moving up a narrow trail carved into the hillside. Sloane kept pace behind Weston, her medical pack heavy against her shoulders. Every step sank slightly into the damp soil. Birds screamed somewhere deep in the trees. An hour later, Harlow began to slow. Not dramatically. Just enough that Sloane noticed. She watched his stride carefully, right foot landing slightly off balance, weight shifting to protect something. An injury. Small, but growing worse. They reached the ridge overlook and stopped. Harlow leaned against a tree. "Just winded," he said. Sloane walked over. "Sit down." He shook his head. "I'm good." She didn't argue. Instead, she crouched and pressed gently along his ankle joint. His face twitched. "There it is," she said quietly. Briggs watched from across the clearing. "What's wrong with him?" "Ligament strain," Sloane said calmly. "Probably from yesterday's jump drill." She wrapped the ankle carefully, using a tight compression technique. Not restricting movement, just stabilizing. Harlow stood up slowly, took a few steps. His eyes widened slightly. "That's actually better." Sloane nodded. "Walk on the center of the foot, avoid the outer edge." Weston gave her a small approving look. Briggs said nothing. But when they resumed the run, he slowed slightly so Sloane could keep pace beside him. It wasn't trust, but it was the first step toward it. Why did the silence before the mission feel louder than the jungle? Night settled over the base. Equipment checks, weapon maintenance, quiet conversations. Sloane sat alone on a wooden crate outside the barracks, organizing her medical kit. Tourniquets, chest seals, clotting gauze, IV supplies. Every item had a purpose. Every item could mean the difference between life and death. Weston sat beside her after a while. "You pack like someone who's done this before," he said. "Different environment," she replied. "Same stakes." He nodded. "Drummond trusted your father." Sloane looked at him. "You served with him too." "Once." Weston stared out at the dark jungle. He pulled 2 men out of a collapsed building in Fallujah, stayed inside while it was still burning. Sloane swallowed slowly. He had never told her that story. Weston stood up. "Get some rest, Doc." He walked away. Sloane looked down at the small force recon patch lying in her bag. Her father's. She placed it carefully inside her vest pocket. Not for luck. For memory. Why did the helicopter ride feel like crossing an invisible line? The Black Hawk lifted off at 400. Inside, the world turned into vibration and wind. The team sat along the sides, helmets on, weapons secured. No one talked. Sloane checked her gear one more time. Tourniquet pouches, bandages, morphine injectors. Everything exactly where it needed to be. Drummond leaned toward her. "Still want to be here?" he asked. She met his gaze. "Yes." He nodded once. The helicopter banked sharply over a dark mountain ridge. Below them, jungle stretched endlessly. Somewhere inside it, 3 civilians were waiting. And somewhere else, men with rifles were preparing to stop them. Briggs tapped her shoulder suddenly. She looked over. He pointed at her vest pocket. The corner of the force recon patch was visible. "You know what that means?" he asked. "Yes." "Then don't get killed wearing it." She almost smiled. The helicopter descended toward a narrow clearing. The mission had begun. But none of them knew yet that before the sun set again, Sloane Mercer would be lying in the dirt, holding a man's life together, while guiding a sniper shot across an entire mountain. Why did the jungle suddenly feel too quiet the moment their boots touched the ground? The helicopter vanished into the darkness as quickly as it had appeared. One moment the rotors thundered overhead. The next moment, only the heavy silence of the jungle remained. Sloane crouched low beside the others, feeling the damp soil through her gloves, The air smelled thick earth, leaves, and distant rain. Somewhere far off, an insect droned like a tiny engine. Drummond raised one hand. The team froze. He listened. 30 seconds passed. Then he nodded once. They moved. The formation stretched naturally along the narrow trail. Weston in front, Torres behind him, Briggs slightly to the right, scanning the ridgeline through night optics. Harlow carried the breaching pack. Sloane stayed near the center, where the medic belongs. Protected but ready. Every step had rhythm. Boot. Breath. Pause. Listen. Sloane's heart beat faster than usual, but her mind felt strangely clear. Training always did that. Years of learning to control panic had turned stress into focus. Still, that quiet instinct returned. The jungle was alive with sound. But something about the pattern felt wrong. Too ordered. Too still. Weston suddenly raised his fist. Everyone stopped. Sloane crouched beside a fallen log. Weston slowly lowered his night optics. "Tripwire," he whispered. Barely visible, a thin metal line stretched between two trees. Torres leaned forward. "Pressure trigger." Briggs muttered under his breath. "Professional." Drummond crouched beside the wire, studying the device carefully. "Not militia work," he said quietly. "Military grade." Sloane felt that tension in her chest tighten slightly. "Former contractors." Exactly like the briefing said. Which meant they were disciplined. And discipline meant patience. Drummond clipped the wire carefully. The team moved again. But now every shadow felt heavier. Every sound carried meaning. And Sloane realized something important. This wasn't going to be a quick mission. Why did Harlow's breathing chain halfway up the ridge? 2 hours later, the climb grew steep. The jungle thinned as they gained elevation, replaced by jagged rock and low brush. Sweat soaked through Sloane's shirt beneath the vest. Her legs burned, but she kept pace. Ahead, Harlow slowed slightly. Not much. Just enough. Sloane watched his posture. His shoulders had tightened. Breathing deeper. Too deep. When the team paused near a rocky outcrop, she moved beside him. "You're compensating," she said quietly. He frowned. "For what?" She touched his side gently. "Rib." He exhaled slowly. "Caught it during training yesterday." "Why didn't you say something?" "Didn't want to be the guy who slows everyone down." Sloane shook her head. "Cracked ribs get worse when ignored." She pulled a small wrap from her kit and secured it tightly around his torso. Not enough to restrict breathing. Just enough to stabilize the fracture. Harlow tested a breath. Then another. "That's better," he admitted. Weston watched from a few feet away. "You good?" he asked Harlow. "Yeah." Then Harlow nodded toward Sloane. "Doc fixed it." Briggs glanced over briefly. Still skeptical. But less than before. Trust wasn't loud in teams like this. It grew quietly. Like roots under soil. Why did Sloane feel eyes watching them long before the attack? The relay station appeared just after dawn. A squat concrete building perched on a mountain plateau. Satellite dishes pointed toward the sky. A wire fence surrounded the compound. 2 armed guards walked the perimeter. Drummond studied the site through binoculars. 3 hostages inside, he said quietly. "How many guards?" Weston asked. 6 confirmed. Briggs adjusted his rifle. "Probably more." Torres scanned the tree line. "Sniper positions." Briggs shrugged. "None obvious." That worried Sloane more than if they had seen one. Invisible threats were the worst kind. Drummond turned to the team. We move fast. Weston and Torres breach. Briggs covers. Harlow stays with Sloane until building is secure. Everyone nodded. Simple plan. Fast execution. But Sloane's instincts kept whispering. Something wasn't right. She scanned the ridges surrounding the compound. Rock formations. Tree shadows. High ground. Perfect sniper terrain. Yet no movement. No flash of glass. Nothing. Which was exactly the problem. Why did the mission unravel in less than 10 seconds? The breech charge detonated with a dull thump. The front door blew inward. Weston and Torres stormed inside. 2 quick shots echoed. Then silence. Clear first room. Weston's voice came over comms. Harlow and Sloane moved forward toward the entrance. Inside, the building smelled like dust and warm electronics. 3 frightened engineers sat tied to chairs against the wall. Torres cut their restraints quickly. "You're safe," he told them. Outside, Briggs scanned the ridge through his scope. The first shot came without warning. Crack! The round slammed into the concrete wall inches from Drummond's shoulder. "Sniper!" Briggs shouted. Everyone dove for cover. Glass shattered. Another shot ripped through the air. Sloane grabbed one of the engineers and pulled him behind a thick support pillar. The man's hands shook violently. "It's okay," she said calmly. "You're okay." Her voice stayed steady. Inside her chest, her heart hammered like a drum. Over the radio, Briggs spoke rapidly. "Northwest ridge, 800 meters, hard angle." Drummond pressed against the wall beside the doorway. "Can you take him?" "Negative," Briggs replied. "Too much rock cover." Another shot struck the ground outside. Dust sprayed through the doorway. Harlow cursed. "They're pinning us." Weston glanced toward Sloane. "Doc, stay inside." But Sloane was already looking toward the ridgeline. That quiet instinct again. Watching. Searching. Her father's voice echoed somewhere deep in memory. "Don't look for the man. Look for the disturbance." She narrowed her eyes. There. A brief flicker of reflected light. Metal against stone. Almost invisible. She stepped outside before anyone could stop her. Why did everyone go silent when Sloane picked up the sniper rifle? The Barrett rifle lay where Briggs had set it behind a rock. 30 pounds of steel. Designed for long-distance precision. Sloane dropped beside it. Briggs' voice exploded over the radio. "Doc, do not touch that rifle." Drummond's voice followed immediately. "Briggs, stand down." Sloane positioned the rifle carefully against her shoulder. The scope view filled with rock and shadow. The ridge sat nearly 800 meters away. Wind drifted left across the valley. Her breathing slowed. In. Out. In. Out. Briggs spoke again. "You miss that shot, he'll relocate." "I know," Sloane said quietly. "How?" "Because my father taught me." The sniper shifted. Just a slight movement. Enough. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle thundered. The recoil slammed into her shoulder. The round struck the ridge. Stone exploded. But the sniper remained. Miss. 8 inches high. Briggs swore loudly. "He's moving." Sloane adjusted the scope. Wind shift. Lower elevation. She calculated instinctively. The sniper paused again behind a rock gap. 2 seconds. Maybe 3. She fired again. The rifle roared across the valley. Through the scope, the shadow disappeared. Silence spread over the ridge. Drummond stepped outside slowly. "Target down?" Weston asked. Briggs scanned carefully. No movement. He lowered his rifle slowly, then looked at Sloane. For the first time, there was no skepticism in his eyes, only surprise. Why did Sloane feel the danger wasn't over yet? The hostages were escorted outside quickly. Vehicles waited down the mountain trail. Extraction only minutes away. But Sloane kept scanning the surrounding cliffs. Something still felt unfinished. The sniper she had hit was real, but the silence around them felt too deliberate, too patient. She remembered something her father once said during a hunting trip years ago. If you see one hunter, there's usually another watching. She turned slowly toward the eastern ridge, a narrow cliff face overlooking the valley. Perfect firing position. And suddenly, a faint glint appeared between two rocks. Her stomach tightened. Another sniper. Waiting. And this one had the perfect angle. She opened her mouth to warn the others. But the shot came first. Crack. Harlow collapsed instantly in the dirt, blood spreading beneath him. And Sloane realized the hardest moment of the mission had just begun. Why did the world suddenly shrink to the sound of one man hitting the ground? Harlow's body struck the dirt with a dull thud. For half a second, no one moved. The jungle, the ridge, the mission, everything faded into the background. All Sloane saw was the spreading dark stain beneath his leg. "Man down," Weston shouted. Another rifle shot cracked from the eastern ridge. Stone splintered beside the doorway. Drummond dragged one of the hostages behind a concrete barrier. Briggs dove toward the rock where the Barrett rifle rested. But Sloane was already moving. 6 long strides. She dropped beside Harlow and rolled him onto his back. Blood pumped from his upper thigh in thick pulses. Bright red. Too bright. Too fast. Her stomach tightened. Femoral artery. The worst kind of wound. The kind that kills before help can arrive. Harlow grabbed her vest, eyes wide with fear. "Doc, don't let me die." His voice trembled. Not loud. Just desperate. Sloane didn't hesitate. She ripped open the pouch on her vest and pulled out a tourniquet. Her hands moved with automatic precision. High on the thigh. Above the wound. Pull tight. Then tighter. The strap dug deep into muscle. Blood still pulsed around the edges. Not tight enough. She twisted the windlass rod. Once. Twice. The bleeding slowed. Then stopped. Harlow gasped sharply as the pressure cut circulation. "That hurts," he groaned. "That means you're still alive," Sloane said calmly. Another shot slammed into the ground 10 feet away. The sniper on the eastern ridge had a clear angle now. And he knew it. Why did Briggs suddenly realize he couldn't see the shooter? Briggs slid behind the Barrett rifle and pressed his eye against the scope. The eastern ridge stretched across his view. Jagged rock. Thin trees. Dozens of possible hiding spots. But no target. "Where is he?" Torres shouted. Briggs adjusted the magnification. "Nothing." "Too much cover," he muttered. The sniper had chosen the perfect position. Hidden. Patient. Deadly. Another round cracked through the air. It struck the ground near the vehicles below. Dust sprayed upward. The hostages screamed. Drummond grabbed one of them and shoved him lower behind the rocks. "Keep them down," he ordered. Briggs shifted again. Still nothing. The shooter wasn't exposing himself. Which meant one thing. He was waiting for the perfect moment. Probably watching them through his own scope. Waiting for someone to stand. Or run. Or panic. Briggs felt something he rarely admitted. Frustration. He hated unseen enemies. "Sloan," Drummond said over the radio. "How Harlow?" She glanced down at the wound. The tourniquet held. Bleeding stopped. Pulse weak but steady. "He'll live," she replied. But even as she said it, another thought formed in her mind. If that sniper kept them pinned here much longer, Harlow might not live long enough to leave the mountain. Why did Sloan look toward the ridge instead of back at Harlow? She pressed one hand firmly against Harlow's shoulder. "Stay with me," she said. His breathing was shaky now, shock beginning to creep in. "Can't feel my leg," he whispered. "That's the tourniquet." He swallowed hard. "You promise I'm not dying?" She met his eyes. "Not today." But Sloan's attention drifted toward the eastern ridge again. The sniper had fired 3 times. 3 different angles. He was repositioning between shots. Disciplined. Experienced. Her father's voice echoed quietly in her memory again. Snipers don't rush. They wait for the shot that matters. She studied the cliff face. A narrow break between 2 massive rocks caught her eye. Perfect firing lane. If she were the sniper, that's where she would be. Briggs' frustrated voice came through the radio. "I can't get eyes on him." Sloan lifted her head slightly. "Eastern wall." Briggs froze. "What?" She pointed with 2 fingers toward the rock formation. 680 meters, gap between the stones. Briggs swung the scope toward the spot. For a second he saw nothing. Then, a faint shadow moved. The barrel of a rifle sliding into position. "Got him," Briggs whispered. But the sniper had already seen them too. The rifle on the ridge began to settle. Right toward Sloan. Right toward Harlow. Why did time feel slower than it ever had before? Sloan didn't move. Running would expose the hostages. Staying meant trusting Briggs to take the shot. The sniper's barrel glinted briefly in the sun. Briggs adjusted the scope. "Wind's shifting," he said quietly. Sloan kept her finger pressed against Harlow's neck, checking his pulse. "Still there. Still fighting." 3 seconds, she said. Briggs frowned. "What?" "He'll fire in 3 seconds." "How do you want?" The rifle on the ridge lifted slightly. 2. Briggs inhaled slowly. The crosshairs aligned. 3. The Barrett rifle roared. The thunder rolled across the valley. Stone shattered near the sniper's position. But the ridge didn't fall silent. The enemy rifle fired at the same instant. The round slammed into the dirt beside Sloan's shoulder. "Too close. Far too close." Briggs cursed. "Missed." The sniper vanished behind the rocks. Repositioning again. Drummond's voice cut through the chaos. "We don't have time for this." The hostages were shaking now. Harlow's breathing had grown weaker. Every minute mattered. Briggs reloaded quickly. "Doc, if he moves again, I'll take him." Sloan stared at the ridge. Her instinct screamed something. The sniper wasn't retreating. He was preparing. Waiting. For a better angle. Why did the second shot matter more than the first? 20 seconds passed. No movement. No gunfire. Just wind sliding across the cliff. Then, a shadow shifted. The sniper leaned out again. Longer this time. Briggs steadied the rifle. But the angle was wrong. A rock blocked the lower half of the body. Only the head and shoulder visible. High-risk shot. Briggs hesitated. If he missed again, the sniper would relocate for good. And then they might never see him again. Sloan saw the hesitation. She raised her hand slightly. Briggs. What? Lower your aim 2 inches. That's rock. Trust me. He didn't ask why. Something in her voice carried certainty. Briggs adjusted the crosshair downward. Ready. The sniper's rifle settled again. Aiming. Directly at Sloane. At Harlow. At the helpless men behind them. Now Sloane whispered. Briggs fired. The Barrett's thunder cracked across the mountain. The round struck the edge of the rock. For a moment, it looked like a miss. Then the bullet ricocheted sharply upward. Through the narrow gap. The shadow on the ridge collapsed instantly. The sniper rifle tumbled down the slope. And finally, the mountain went quiet. Why did no one speak for several seconds after the shot? Briggs kept his eye on the scope. Waiting. Watching. Nothing moved. No second shooter. No returning fire. Just wind and empty stone. Finally, he lowered the rifle slowly. Target down. Weston exhaled. Torres leaned back against the wall. Drummond gave a small nod. Move the hostages. The team quickly began escorting the civilians down the trail toward the vehicles. But Sloane stayed beside Harlow. She loosened the tourniquet slightly, checking circulation. Still stable. He blinked slowly at her. Did we win? She smiled faintly. We're leaving the mountain, that's close enough. He laughed weakly. Good. She helped lift him onto a stretcher. As the team began descending the trail, Briggs walked beside her quietly. For the first time since they met, there was no doubt in his voice. You saved his life. Sloane shook her head. No. She glanced toward the ridge where the sniper had fallen. We saved each other. The jungle wind moved softly through the trees as they carried Harlow toward the waiting vehicles. And in that quiet moment, Sloane realized something her father had tried to teach her long ago. Heroism wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Most of the time, it looked like someone kneeling in the dirt, holding a tourniquet with one hand, while guiding a sniper shot with the other. Why did the mountain feel heavier on the way down than it had on the climb up? The team moved slowly along the narrow trail, boots scraping against loose stone. The jungle below them was waking now. Sunlight slipped between the trees, turning the mist gold. But no one noticed the beauty. They were focused on the man lying on the stretcher. Harlow. Weston and Torres carried the front and rear handles, moving carefully so the injured leg stayed elevated. Sloane walked beside them, one hand resting lightly against Harlow's chest. Monitoring. Counting breaths. Feeling the rhythm of his pulse through the thin fabric of his shirt. Steady. Weak. But alive. Briggs moved ahead of them, rifle scanning the ridgeline out of habit. Even after the sniper fell, nobody trusted the silence. Drummond walked last, watching the trail behind. The formation had changed. Earlier, Sloane had walked protected in the center. Now she walked beside the wounded man. Exactly where she belonged. Harlow's eyes opened slightly. You still there, Doc? I'm still here. His voice sounded distant. Leg feels like it's on fire. That's normal. Doesn't feel normal. She gave a small smile. That means the nerves are still working. He tried to laugh but winced. Guess that's good news. They walked another 20 meters before Sloane raised a hand. Stop. Weston froze instantly. What is it? She crouched beside Harlow's leg. The tourniquet was still tight, but the skin below it had started turning pale. Too pale. She checked his pulse again. Slower now. Shock creeping deeper. We need fluids, she said. Drummond nodded. Do it. Sloane opened her medical kit and worked quickly. Alcohol wipe. Needle. IV line. Clear fluid began flowing into Harlow's arm. He watched her through half-closed eyes. You ever think about doing this somewhere safer? He asked quietly. Every day. Then why don't you? She paused for a moment. Because some questions deserve honest answers. Because people still get hurt out here. Harlow stared at her. Then nodded slowly. Yeah. He closed his eyes again. And the team continued down the mountain. Why did Briggs keep replaying the sniper shot in his mind? The vehicles appeared an hour later at the base of the trail. 2 armored trucks hidden beneath heavy camouflage netting. Torres opened the rear door while Weston and Drummond lifted Harlow carefully inside. Sloane climbed in beside him. The engine roared to life. As the convoy began moving through the jungle road, Briggs sat across from Sloane in silence. His rifle rested against the wall beside him. His mind, however, refused to stay quiet. He had spent 12 years behind scopes. Afghanistan, Iraq, places where the air smelled like dust and war. He had seen good shooters, great shooters, but the way Sloane had read that ridge, the way she predicted the sniper's movement, it wasn't luck. It was instinct. He leaned forward slightly. Your father teach you that? Sloane adjusted the IV bag, hanging from a metal hook. Some of it. What was he? Recon. Briggs nodded slowly. That explained a lot. My old instructor used to say something, he said. What? A good sniper sees the target. Sloane looked up. And a great one, she asked. Sees the moment before the target moves. She gave a small smile. My father said something similar. Briggs studied her for a second, then leaned back against the seat. Guess I owe you coffee. What for? You saved my shot. She shook her head slightly. No. She glanced at Harlow's bandaged leg. We saved him. For the first time since they met. Briggs didn't argue. Why did the hospital feel strangely familiar after everything that had happened? The military hospital stood on the edge of the coastal base. Clean white walls. Bright lights. The quiet hum of machines. Sloane walked beside the stretcher as medics rolled Harlow through the emergency doors. Doctors moved quickly. Hands checking wounds. Voices calling instructions. Controlled chaos. Sloane stepped aside as the surgical team took over. A surgeon glanced at her. You stabilized the artery. Yes. He examined the tourniquet placement. Perfectly positioned. He nodded with quiet respect. Nice work. They wheeled Harlow through double doors toward the operating room. The doors swung shut. Silence followed. Sloane stood in the hallway for a long moment. The same smell as every hospital. Antiseptic. Sterile air. But this place felt different. Out there on the mountain, medicine was raw. Immediate. Life or death decided in seconds. Here things moved slower. More controlled. More distant. Briggs stepped beside her. You good? He asked. She nodded. Yeah. But her eyes stayed on the operating room doors. Because she knew something most people didn't. Even the best surgeons couldn't always undo what bullets did. Why did Drummond hand her something she wasn't expecting? 2 hours later the team sat in a quiet briefing room. Exhaustion settled into their bones. Weston leaned back with his arms folded. Torres drank coffee like a man who hadn't slept in days. Briggs cleaned his rifle again. Some habits never changed. The door opened. Drummond stepped inside. He held something in his hand. A small cloth patch. Dark green. Silver thread stitched into the shape of a trident. The Navy SEAL insignia. He placed it gently on the table in front of Sloane. She looked at it. Then at him. "This isn't mine," she said. "Not yet," Drummond replied. The room grew quiet. "You held that team together today," he continued. "You read the terrain, stabilized a critical casualty, directed a sniper engagement under fire." He paused. "Not many people can do that." Sloane shook her head. "I'm just a medic." Drummond's eyes softened slightly. "Exactly." Weston gave a faint smile. Torres nodded in agreement. Even Briggs stopped cleaning the rifle. Sloane looked down at the trident patch again. Her father had worn one just like it. Years ago. In photographs she kept in a small box at home. She slid the patch back across the table. "I'll earn it first." Drummond studied her for a moment. Then smiled. A quiet, approving smile. "Fair enough." Why did the call from Virginia feel heavier than the firefight on the mountain? 3 days later, Sloane sat alone on a bench outside the hospital. The ocean stretched across the horizon. Waves moved slowly beneath gray clouds. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. "Sloane Mercer." "Yes." "This is Daniel Hartfield from Portsmouth Medical Center." Her stomach tightened slightly. "The administrator. The man who had fired her." "I'm calling regarding the report you filed," he continued. She stayed silent. "We conducted a full investigation." She stared at the ocean. The waves kept moving. Unconcerned with human mistakes. "The dosage error you documented was confirmed," Hartfield said. "The physician involved has been suspended pending review." Sloane closed her eyes for a moment. Not satisfaction. Just quiet relief. "What about the patient's family?" she asked. "They've been informed." A pause followed. "Your termination is also being reconsidered." Sloane almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it suddenly felt so small. A hospital office. A paper report. Administrative decisions. All of it seemed distant now compared to the mountain. Compared to Harlow lying in the dirt bleeding into her hands. "I appreciate the call," she said calmly. But when she hung up, she didn't feel angry anymore. She felt something else. Perspective. Why did Harlow's first words after surgery make everyone laugh? The hospital room was quiet when Sloane stepped inside. Machines beeped steadily beside the bed. Harlow lay propped against white pillows, his leg wrapped in thick bandages. Weston sat near the window. Briggs leaned against the wall. Torres flipped through a magazine he clearly wasn't reading. Harlow's eyes opened slowly. He blinked at Sloane. "You still owe me a beer," she said. He stared at her. Then smiled weakly. "Thought medics were supposed to save lives." "Sometimes. Not charge interest." The room erupted in laughter. Even Briggs smiled. For a moment, the war outside the hospital walls didn't exist. It was just a group of tired people sitting in a quiet room. Grateful to still be there. Later, as Sloane walked back down the hallway alone, she slipped her hand into her vest pocket. Her father's Force Recon patch rested there. A reminder. Not of the past, but of the path she had stepped onto. Because somewhere out there, another mission would come. Another team would need someone steady in the middle of chaos. And when that moment arrived, Sloane Mercer would be ready. Not because she was fearless, but because she had learned something far more important. Courage isn't loud. It doesn't shout or demand recognition. Most of the time, it looks like a quiet person kneeling beside someone who's bleeding, refusing to let them go. And sometimes, that kind of courage is the strongest weapon on the battlefield. Why did the quiet hallway outside the hospital room feel heavier than the battlefield had? Sloane stood alone near the end of the corridor, leaning lightly against the cool wall. The evening sun filtered through tall windows, stretching long golden reflections across the polished floor. Inside the room behind her, Harlow was laughing again. Not loudly, just enough that the sound drifted through the door. Alive. That was the word that mattered. Alive. 3 days ago, she had knelt in the dirt with his blood soaking through her gloves. 3 days ago, a sniper rifle had been aimed directly at her chest. But now the only sound was hospital monitors and distant footsteps. Funny how quickly the world could change. She folded her arms and watched the ocean outside the window. Calm water. Slow waves. Peaceful in a way battlefields never were. Yet something inside her felt unsettled. Because for the first time since the mission ended, she had time to think. And sometimes thinking was harder than surviving. Why did Drummond's question feel more difficult than the firefight? Footsteps echoed softly behind her. Drummond stopped beside her, hands resting in the pockets of his jacket. "You've been quiet," he said. "Just thinking. That can be dangerous." She smiled faintly. "Depends what you're thinking about." He studied her for a moment. "Command wants to know if you're staying." The words hung in the air. Sloane didn't answer immediately. She already knew what he meant. Temporary deployment was one thing. Joining the operational medical program permanently was another. It meant missions, risk, long absences, the kind of life her father had lived. "What do you want?" Drummond asked. Sloane looked back toward Harlow's room. Through the small window, she could see Weston talking to Torres, while Briggs leaned against the wall with his arms folded. A strange group of people. Hard men. Quiet men. Men who trusted each other with their lives. And somehow, they had started trusting her too. "I don't know yet," she admitted. Drummond nodded slowly. "That's honest." He started to walk away, then stopped. "Your father never hesitated," he said. Sloane raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a compliment." It was. She turned toward him. He believed responsibility meant never stepping away. Drummond's voice softened slightly, and that belief cost him more than he ever admitted. The hallway grew quiet again. After a moment, Drummond walked off down the corridor, leaving Sloane alone with a question she hadn't expected. Why did the letter in her pocket suddenly feel important again? She sat outside later that night on a bench overlooking the ocean. The base had gone quiet. Only distant waves and the hum of security lights remained. Sloane pulled the old letter from her jacket pocket. Her father's handwriting still looked exactly the same. Steady. Calm. She read the final paragraph again. "You'll be tempted to think this life is about bravery. It is. It's about responsibility. If you choose it because someone needs you. Not because you feel like you owe the world something." The paper rustled softly in the ocean breeze. For years she had believed she understood what he meant. But after the mountain, after watching Harlow bleed into the dirt, after hearing a sniper bullet strike the ground inches from her shoulder, the words carried a different weight. Responsibility wasn't about proving strength. It was about showing up when things fell apart. She folded the letter slowly, then slipped it back into her pocket. Why did Briggs suddenly appear with 2 cups of coffee? You look like someone trying to solve a problem, he said. Sloane glanced up. Briggs stood there holding 2 steaming paper cups. She accepted one. Thanks. He sat beside her on the bench. For a while they both just watched the ocean. You're staying, right? He finally asked. You sound confident. Because I know how these things go. Oh. He shrugged. People who walk away from this life usually do it fast. And the ones who stay, they hesitate first. Sloane smiled slightly. That's a strange way to measure it. Briggs took a sip of coffee. You ever notice something about combat? He said. What? The loudest people rarely last long. She looked at him curiously. The quiet ones do. Why? Because they listen. The wind moved softly across the water. Briggs stood up. You know what the team calls you now, he added. Sloane frowned. What? Guardian. She laughed softly. That sounds dramatic. Not really, he said. You just happen to be the one person everyone hopes is nearby when things go wrong. With that, he walked away toward the barracks, leaving Sloane alone again with the sound of waves. Why did Harlow's words the next morning answer the question she could? The hospital room was bright with morning sunlight. Harlow sat upright in bed now, his injured leg elevated but healing well. Weston and Torres had already left for training. Briggs stood near the window, pretending not to listen. Sloane checked Harlow's bandages carefully. No infection, she said. Good. He studied her face for a moment. You deciding whether to stay? She looked up sharply. How did you? Everyone knows. He leaned back against the pillows. Mind if I tell you something? Go ahead. When I got shot up there, his voice grew quieter. I thought about my family. Sloane nodded. That's normal. Then I thought about something else. What? He looked directly at her. I thought about the way you said nobody dies today. Sloane felt her chest tighten slightly. Harlow smiled. You sounded so certain. I was trying to keep you calm. Well, it worked. He paused. Because if someone believes that strongly you're going to live, it becomes a lot harder to give up. The room grew quiet. Briggs stared out the window. Harlow continued softly. Teams like ours don't survive because of weapons, or training, or luck. He tapped the edge of the bed gently. They survive because someone refuses to quit on them. Sloane didn't respond right away. But deep inside, something settled into place. Why did the final decision feel surprisingly simple? 2 days later, Sloane stood once again near the helicopter pad. The same place where everything had started. The Black Hawk sat ready for departure. Drummond waited beside it. You made up your mind, he asked. She nodded. Yes. And Sloane looked across the base. At the hospital. At the training field. At the distant ocean. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out her father's Force Recon patch. She held it for a moment, then slipped it back into her vest. I'll stay. Drummond studied her face. You're sure? She smiled quietly. Someone needs to make sure you idiots don't bleed out on mountains. He laughed. Fair enough. The helicopter blades began to spin slowly. Wind swept across the landing pad. Sloane climbed aboard and took her seat beside the others. Briggs gave her a small nod. Weston handed her a headset. Torres grinned. And for the first time since the mission, everything felt clear. Not easy, not safe, but right. Because sometimes strength isn't loud. It doesn't need medals or speeches. Sometimes strength looks like a medic kneeling in the dirt, holding pressure on a wound while bullets fly overhead. Sometimes it looks like a quiet decision made on a windy helicopter pad. And sometimes the strongest people in the world are the ones who simply refuse to walk away. Because in the end, dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It simply shows up when someone needs it most. And then it stays.